Dzień dobry, namaste, assalamu alaikum, ciao, konnichiwa, bonjour, hola, good morning, good morning, good morning. This is Ken at 10, where we discuss all things property every weekday for your interest and perusal. How are you? We're James Alexander Estate Agents based in Southwest London, Southwest 16, Norbury to be precise, which is a fantastic Zone 3 commuter area that you should consider if you're thinking about buy-to-let or buying to live and you need to commute into London. How are you? Hope you're well. A couple of news headlines that caught my eye today. Number one was the number of buyers pulling out of property sales has risen. Well, we always find this when the kind of slant goes towards prices being neutral or dropping, then the buyers hold the upper hand and therefore they're more whimsical about it. What happens when the market is rising is, of course, buyers find that the property that they're buying by the time the transaction's gone through is worth substantially more than they were paying at the beginning of the transaction. Therefore, they're never going to pull out because it's worth 5, 10, 20, maybe 50 or 100,000 more than when they started buying it. But of course, in a market where it's static or fallen slightly, then the opposite could be the case. And that's what we're seeing happening now. And this is an article from the Daily Telegraph. It reveals that new data reveals the number of buyers pulling out of property sales and collapse chains increased sharply over the past 3 months. Analysis by 20CI, a property data company, found the share of agreed sales collapsing before completion jumped to a high of 25% in November. 25%, that's a quarter of all sales fell through. That's a huge amount, isn't it? Richard Donnell, the director of Zoopla, says the last quarter of last year really tested people's mettle. Everyone was being tested on numerous fronts, and that led to a big increase in fall-throughs. Of course, at that time also we're experiencing meteoric rises in interest rates, and of course that had an impact. Buyers perhaps couldn't get the rate that they first expected, and then the rates trebling would have been very scary, especially for new first-time buyers. So one can understand it from that point of view as well. But it does beg the question, if 25% of them fell through, were they tied up correctly in the first place? Were the buyers investigated properly by the agents? This is quite an important part of what an estate agency, a good estate agency job is to make sure that buyers are who they say they are. And the amount of times buyers have said to me, oh, don't worry about the money. I always say the same thing. I do worry about the money. Why do I worry about the money? Because I'm paid to worry about the money. My client pays me to make sure that you're the best buyer for them in these circumstances. So I need proof of everything, proof of your money, where it came from. And top tip for you first-time buyers out there especially is make sure that you've got your ducks in a row. Make sure you know, number one, where the deposit is, and you've got proof of that, and you can email that directly to the estate agent that you're dealing with, or seller directly if you're dealing with the seller directly. Number two, make sure you've got identification ready, and that's in the form of a passport, driving license, some photo ID, and some personal ID. And number three, make sure you supply details of your finances in as much detail as you possibly can, either via an agreement in principle, also known as an AIP, or supply details of whatever quotation you've had from brokers, and perhaps some correspondence with those brokers, definitely their contact numbers if you're dealing directly with a broker. Can make all the difference to you as a buyer if you're trying to negotiate the best possible deal. And of course, for a seller, what you're doing is giving them comfort. They're more likely to go with you than anyone else. Another article in the Telegraph, the long-term consequences of equity release can be devastating. There's an interesting one. Over 55s borrowed a record £5.6 billion against their properties last year, as the cost of living crisis drove more people to extract cash from their properties and recover from the recession. But experts are warning that vulnerable homeowners are being pressured into taking out loans that may not be suitable. Well, this is not financial advice, because that's not what we're here to do. But the whole point of equity release is that you're taking some money out at the best possible rates. And in some cases, you don't have to pay that money back until you or your spouse passes. And at that point, it's paid back with interest. And these roll-ups in interest can be significant and substantial. So it's important that you get the correct advice from your financial advisors. And what they're basically saying is that it's not always the case that people are getting the best advice. Because, of course, if there are people that you want to benefit when you pass, and you want to pass those funds on to your family, then it can have a significant hit on those finances. So it's really important that you understand what it is you're doing. That's not a recommendation to do it or not to do it, just to have your eyes open and make sure you realize what you're in for, how much you're in for, and how that might impact on your estate. And God forbid, in the final days when we pass. Cash purchases have made a significant uptake as well. It's an interesting one. 40% of purchases have been in cash. This is the highest level for 8 years, according to Hamptons. And it says that 40% of purchases have been completed using cash so far in January. This is the highest since December 2014, when 41% of buyers were mortgage free rather than three. More than 50% of purchases in the country in the second half of October, whole of November and December, and the first half of January were completed using cash. So this is interesting because we often think that mortgages are the be-all and end-all when it comes to the property market. But actually, when half of the market is cash, that significantly changes things. That means that half the people buying don't care what interest rates are. It doesn't matter to them. They're actually buying with cash, so it has no impact whatsoever. So I thought that was quite an interesting take on things, and certainly gives a new perspective where we all worry about finance. It's not always the case that people are using finance. And finally, an interesting article, a think tank criticising government housing policy. Well, we do like a bit of criticism of housing policy. And this is a conservative-leaning think tank that's described their current housing policy based on catastrophically flimsy beliefs, and says the government must increase the supply of new houses being built across the UK. And this is a new report in the Centre for Policy Studies. It says claims that we can meet our housing need from brownfield alone rest on a series of catastrophically implausible assumptions. Go on, Elizabeth. Elizabeth Dunkley said the case for house building is simple. Without it, Britain will be a less productive, less equal, less fair, and less happy country. Building more homes is the clearest way to boost economic growth and rebuild our economy. And I couldn't agree more with that. The only thing I would say on that is the idea that new build is the only way. I think really we need to look at all of these vacant shops up and down the country and developing those into much needed housing at the poor end of the spectrum. You know, at the very bottom of the market, that's where the desperate needs are. I really do think that needs to be addressed. But it won't be, and the housing crisis will continue, no doubt, unabated until someone realises that it's going to be the hot topic at the moment. Borrowers could see monthly mortgage payments fall by as much as 25%. This is new analysis showing that borrowers could see their mortgage payments fall by the end of 2023 as house prices and mortgage rates continue to slip. Research by wealth manager Quilter found that taking into account predicted falls in house prices and mortgage rates, a borrower in November this year would pay $4,500 less in monthly payments than a borrower would take the same loan out last November. The average property cost $294,000 in November 22, at the time which rates peaked at approximately 6%. And taking out a mortgage now, 25 years with an 80% loan to value, they'll be facing mortgage payments of $1,520. I would say, you know, the thing about that is it's good news. What we're seeing is the forward rates are coming down. That means that the long-term picture is of lower interest rates. I think in the short term, we've got to brace ourselves. I think we're probably in for another half-point increase. That's due in a week's time on the 2nd of February. So we're all holding our breath and waiting for that. But I suspect we'll see interest rates increase by half a point this time. That could be the last increase, and then we could start to see them drop off. It might be we've got another one or two yet. The consensus is that interest rates will peak at 4.5%. It could be that 4 is the limit where we start to see inflation tail off significantly. We can only hope about what's going on in Ukraine, because that has an impact on inflation, and that in turn has an impact on where we go next in terms of those things. But it'll be interesting to see. As far as the market's concerned, so far, busy on valuations, but busy on people viewing as well, and offers coming in. So it's not as bad as some would have you believe. So that's it for today. Hope you've enjoyed today's property news. Look after yourselves, and if you can, your family and friends. We're back at the same time tomorrow. Until then, ciao.